dealing with halfway houses and a reference to state statute. That reference to state statute, again, very specific, was the reason why once upon a time we had 6-month review periods between the time we heard the first reading of a halfway house request and when the actual vote would move forward. State action was taken this past assembly to remove that 6-month hold. And so we were directed to amend our ordinance. Now, our ordinance only had reference to the state statute. So if the statute changed, our ordinance was kind of safe because it was a cross-reference. So state law changes, our ordinance really didn't have to change. But the directive we received was change it. So we did.
So it'll just make it so there's no 6-month waiting period. It'll be treated like any other.
Correct. And honestly, we had already reviewed one of these since the statute changed. If you remember, we had Peach Street and Henderson Extension. Peach Street had a 6-month hold. Henderson Extension did not. So we were already doing this, and we were doing it completely in a legal fashion with our code. Yet and still, we were directed by resolution to clean this up. I think that some of the memory that we're going to hear from the discussion, this may be where you were headed, Alex, with your comment. There was an interest in revisiting halfway houses as a use and where those are and aren't in our zoning code and how they're handled as permitted, not permitted, or a special use. I think that was the discussion that we were having during the Henderson Avenue extension deliberation and the Peach Street deliberation. This resolution didn't ask us to take that up. We only did what the scope of the resolution told us to do, and that's why this text amendment is very, very modest. Happy to answer any questions, though.
I would suggest that maybe we just defer questions until January so that everyone's questions can be addressed at the same time and you don't have to answer the same question next month from somebody who's not here right now. Because we can't vote today and there'd be a certain amount of redundancy, I think, if we do any real discussion of it right now. Is that all right with everyone?
I can live with that.
Okay.
I mean, that helped me. That's what I thought I read. I'll just put it that way. But it's like you said, when I went into it, I was not expecting to read that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Do we need to do any of the formally calling meeting to order and stuff like that? Okay. Can we give the folks who might be watching online an 10-second intro as to what's been going on and what's happening for the rest of the day?
Okay. So we are streaming.
We are streaming, yes. And Adam is our representative from Urban 3. He's joined.
Okay, this is the unofficial December 12th, 2024 meeting of the Athens-Clarke County Planning Commission. We lack a quorum due to various illnesses and other scheduling conflicts of a number of members of this body. And so we are legally prohibited from taking any official action such as a vote on any matter. But we have an important agenda item scheduled today, which is to have a conversation with the city's consultant, Urban 3, to discuss the economics of zoning and things like that in Athens-Clarke County. And so at this point, I'll turn it over to Mark. Do you want to introduce the presenter?
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us if you're online and all those who are here with us. We've been working with Urban 3 for a few months now, and we are getting into some of the analysis. We also wanted to allow them to speak on the concept. We've talked to the group about some of the work they're doing, very important to our future land use efforts and a lot of our efforts in the long-range planning side for Athens-Clarke County. So Adam Carr is here with us, joining in from Asheville, where he's got power and water and everything back to his house. So we're really happy for all that. In that regard, we do want to have some interactive discussion here. We've had Adam join our future land use steering committee. We've had quite a few meetings ourselves, meetings with other staff departments, and they're working on a bunch of data that I'll let Adam show you all. Just to let everyone know how we'll be going forward, we're expecting Urban 3 to visit in the new year, and then for some mostly staff and administrative visits, and then for a large presentation when they're all finished, which we're hoping to have this body, our commission, other elected officials, other departments, and as much of the public as we can possibly get, because this work really is trying to drive some of the decisions we're making. We're trying to put some of that data to some of the decisions we've made. You all have probably heard us talk about using a land use budget approach to how we're doing some of our future land use. So a lot of the things they crunch and a lot of the images they show really help people understand how using some of those numbers allow us to do a better job of making decisions for this board, for policies, and for studies that we have going on. So Adam will say all that much better than I will, so I'm just going to turn it over to him and allow Adam to take over. So thanks, Adam.
Sounds good. Thanks a bunch, Mark. Can y'all hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, thanks so much for having me this evening. Yeah, looking forward to presenting the work that we have so far. Like Mark mentioned, we're going to be doing more work with Athens-Clarke over the coming months. And yeah, are excited to show off what we have and look forward to continuing the work. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully y'all will be seeing a presentation in a moment. Can y'all see? Let me put it into play mode. Can y'all see my screen all right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. And now let me hide this. Oh, there we go. Okay. 1 second, sorry. Okay. So, yeah, like Mark mentioned, we are a land use economics firm based out of Asheville, North Carolina. And we like to use visuals and kind of graphics to help communicate somewhat complex or perhaps mundane economic information related to land use and development patterns and how different types of patterns impact long-term fiscal health of communities. Our work with Athens-Clarke is focusing on looking at both revenue side of things and how different land uses impact revenues, and also costs. The revenues that we're going to be looking at are focused on property tax revenue, but we're also going to be looking at sales tax revenue and retail tax revenue as well. Today, we just have the property revenue side of things. The sales tax analysis is still in process, but just wanted to give you all an overview of kind of what we'll be looking at. But first, kind of wanted to jump into some just brief background and kind of basis for what we're talking about. One of the things we like to think about is kind of what makes up a city, what makes up a county, and really what a city and a county are, or cities and counties are, kind of finite areas of land. And it's our perspective at Urban 3 that we need to be really informed about how that land is being used, and is that use kind of maximizing the value for that community. Farmers talk about land in kind of a different way. They're really conscious of how every square foot of their property is being used to generate crops and produce their livelihood. They'll talk about their land in terms of crop yield per acre, water consumption per acre, those sorts of metrics to understand how productive they are at using their farm, using their land. And we think that cities and counties can kind of have a similar perspective. And there's different kinds of value. There's, of course, like financial productivity, but also values in kind of creating valuable open space, valuable civic spaces. So taking that all into consideration is what we like to think about. And one of the other kind of analogies that we'll use with kind of this per acre or kind of productivity perspective is how we talk about cars. When we talk about cars, we don't talk about cars in miles per tank, because we all realize that each car has a different tank size, right? We talk about cars in terms of efficiency and how many miles you get per gallon. And so then we can kind of really get an apples to apples comparison of how efficient vehicles are using kind of this precious resource in gasoline. And this is something that we're used to considering. One of the things, taking this kind of math and taking this information a step further, is using visuals to help communicate that information. And so what we like to think our work kind of does is do an economic MRI. We can take a brain scan and understand how all the different pieces of neurons and brain material connect to transmit information in your head, right? We want to be able to use graphics to communicate similar information for how money flows through your community and communicate that information easily to a wide variety of audiences. So let's jump into the data for Athens-Clarke and some of the work we've been doing with y'all. The first place that we like to start is looking at a place's budget. And because that's how we can really understand how money's moving throughout the local government and what pieces are kind of important to consider. So when we look at the 2023 operating budget, focusing on the general fund, we can see that there's a $170 million of revenue, $160 million of expenditure, and a really important part of that is property taxes. And so, like I mentioned, we'll be kind of analyzing property taxes. We plan to layer in the sales tax piece as well. So that altogether would encompass about 70% of of Athens-Clarke's general fund revenues. This is just another way of looking at that same information, but through what we call a financial flow diagram. And so you can kind of see how money flows into the general fund and how it flows out to various expenditure categories. From here, we can jump into visualizing some of that property tax data. And here, this perspective, we're looking at kind of the total assessed value. So this is the miles per tank. You can see those large properties that have a significant amount of value on them because they're so large. Those are the kind of the purples and reds in the high value here. As you get down to the oranges, yellows, greens, you're moving lower in value, and gray is not taxable. You can see some large features like UGA right there in the middle. So this is that miles per tank, like I mentioned. When we flip to that miles per gallon perspective, you can kind of see the map change, but you can really see what's going on when we take it into 3D. And this gives us a really good perspective on what properties throughout the city and county are generating a lot of value given the amount of land that they take up. You can kind of tell where downtown Athens is here, but also see some other productive developments around downtown and in some areas a little outside the core. One of the metrics that we like to look at is what we call productivity ratio. So here what we're comparing is the taxable acres, so kind of the physical footprint that downtown Athens takes up in the county compared to the value that it generates. So downtown Athens is about 0.2% of the county's footprint, but generates 8% of the value. And so that is a 1 to 38.6 ratio. And really what that's saying is that downtown is 39 times as productive as the county as a whole. A metric that we like to think about here as representing a really healthy downtown is 1 to 6. We'll typically focus on that for just a city. And given that Athens-Clarke is kind of a city county, it's a little different, but I think it's clear that Athens has a really healthy and productive downtown. So it's just an impressive metric to see. One of the other analytical pieces we like to dig into next is just taxable versus exempt land throughout the county. So 83% of the county is taxable, 17% is non-taxable. And one of the things that we wanted to highlight, being a college community, I hail from a college town, is kind of the makeup, the composition that UGA takes up in Athens. And it's actually not that much. Perhaps this is surprising, but it's 3%. So it's not nothing. But there is a bunch of kind of other things that UGA brings in, of course. So just wanted to highlight that for y'all. Drilling into downtown, we can kind of see the impact of how much exempt lands is in downtown, and still see that productivity, which is really impressive. But 56% of downtown's non-taxable. There's a lot of institutional uses, religious institutions as well, that kind of compose downtown. And I guess just for comparison's sake, we did some work in another college town, Gainesville, Florida, a while back. Their downtown was about 39% non-taxable. And as a whole, the city was about 35% non-taxable. So, the amount of non-taxable land in downtown Athens is it's interesting, and it's kind of just something to note moving forward. From here, what we want to do is kind of jump into some examples of different land uses and kind of put almost a face to the name when we were kind of looking at that 3D model, so that it's easy to kind of connect how people every day experience the urban form and development patterns in Athens to what those value per acre numbers are. And just for fun, when we're kind of going through, you'll see some of the higher value per acre numbers. We've put some little badges on. So for anything that's over 5.1 million per acre, you'll see an UGA pop up on that. For anything that's over 9.9 million per acre, you'll see a Vince Dooley Camellia pop up. And then for anything that's over 33 million per acre, you'll see a jumping Kirby Smart. So we had to have a little fun. But as we're going through this next section, you'll see these little badges on the different examples that we run through when they kind of are these extremely productive value per acres. So to start off, we like to just get a feel for what kind of a big box development pattern how it performs from this value per acre perspective in y'all's community. Most folks are familiar with a Walmart or kind of this big box pattern. And so in Athens-Clarke, the average is about 0.5, 0.6 million per acre for the average Walmart. And we'll keep that in the bottom left of the screen moving forward. From here, we'll just kind of walk through some different residential typologies. So starting with low density, then into gentle density like duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, looking at medium density in townhouses, and then higher density apartments and condominiums. So here are some examples of different single family residential developments found throughout the county, ranging from 0.2 million per acre up to 3.2 million per acre. So there is a wide variety in productivity in single family residential developments. It kind of just depends on, again, the amount of land that's consumed versus the amount of building that's on those properties. Here are some examples of different missing middle, kind of in that gentle density category with duplexes and triplexes, ranging from 0.2 million per acre to 0.8 million per acre. Here are some examples of townhomes, and one of the things that's interesting to note here is you're kind of seeing a higher floor in that value per acre metric. So here, starting at 2.2 million per acre, but really getting up into that getting near close to double-digit value per acre numbers. And so here you can see where UGA comes in on those townhomes on Pinecrest Drive. Here are some examples of multifamily residential. Again, I'll note the higher floor, especially compared to single family or kind of that gentle density. And then you kind of start to see a higher ceiling for the productivity for these developments, like 6.5 million at Woodrow Street. And then really when you get into, not really tall buildings, but 3 to 6 stories, you really start to see some really high productivity numbers here, from 34 to 38 million on Broad Street. And so here's kind of an average of the different value per acre metrics for these different development types. About 500,000 for single family across the county, 2.6 million for missing middle, and close to 10 million per acre for multifamily. Next, we can dig into some different commercial land use types. So again, kind of back to the larger property size, lower density. This one, we know that this is kind of being redeveloped currently, and one of the things that we'll be excited to dig into in the future is looking at, given some of the projections for the different development proposals and kind of the future development pattern for this mall. We'll be interested to kind of run some projections using both the revenue and cost work that we're doing to see how it's projected to perform. But right now, the Georgia Square Mall is at 0.3 million per acre, and so this is definitely going to change, and we'll be excited to dig into that moving forward. Some other kind of commercial centers, shopping centers, range from 0.6 million up to 1.9 million at the Beechwood Shopping Center. So interesting to see that a good range on these as well. Digging into some kind of smaller scale development or more Main Street style development, you see a lot of productivity on East Clayton Street here, from about 16 million per acre up to 26.5 million per acre at the Impeccable Pig. And you can really see how these buildings that are, right up next to each other, both produce an interesting streetscape, but also a lot of productivity from this property value per acre perspective. Looking at Broad Street just across from campus, again, a lot of high productivity properties, even in buildings that aren't that large, right? Of course, there are some larger buildings, University Towers being kind of an interesting case with some student housing in there. So that metric of 1.5 million per acre is relatively low, but that's because a lot of the building is non-taxable. So only a small portion is really contributing to that taxable value per acre. So just wanted to highlight that, but some really productive uses right here. We also wanted to zoom in. So, downtown we've talked about a lot, but there's also some really interesting commercial nodes at Normaltown and Five Points that we wanted to dig into. So here's where those two pop up on the model, and we'll zoom in a little bit one more time, and start off with Normaltown and highlight some different developments, different commercial developments in Normaltown. And you can kind of see this higher floor again of value productivity, 1.7 million per acre at Marty's, up to 3 million at Sips. And then as you kind of move through some of the other developments, you can see 3.6 million per acre at Agua Linda, up to 9 million at Square One Fish. So again, seeing this kind of compact development pattern generating a lot of value. And these aren't large buildings. These are just one story kind of Main Street style commercial uses, right? From here we can dig into 5 Points. And again, looking at some of these kind of small scale commercial examples, but they're being a little bit more efficient with the use of their properties. Less surface parking, kind of more building on these lots. Here's another little strip with Expat, Barbroon, seeing 7.7 million per acre, some productive uses here, and then highlighting just a few more with kind of the top for the 5 Points area being Independent Baking Company at 11 million per acre. So yeah, again, one-story building producing tremendous value. Then we can kind of move into the mixed use development patterns. And this is really where we start to see things really start to shoot up. So some different examples here, taller buildings, but again, at like the Cotton Exchange, it's only 3 stories getting to 21.5 million per acre. Here, just some more from downtown at 130 Hickory Street at 26.7 million per acre, and then up to the Fred at 42.8 million per acre. You got a lot more Kirby's on these slides. He's definitely jumping on these. A couple more examples: the Georgian at 43 million per acre, and 250 West Broad at 54 million per acre. And the peak in terms of productivity in Athens is at 110 Clayton Street at 67.6 million per acre. Kirby jumping all the way up there for this one. So yeah, again, not not a tremendously tall building, but being really efficient with the use of its lot, and you know, a lot of value being produced on this property. Here we're just, again, doing some averages of different commercial patterns that we see across the county. So kind of that lower density, big box shopping center development pattern kind of averages at $500,000 per acre, with Main Street and mixed use really seeing a tremendous jump up from that to 21 and nearly 30 million per acre for those. So we also like to highlight some historic buildings or old buildings that our grandparents and great grandparents have left behind. Here is the 480 East Broad Street, still generating a tremendous amount of value at 14.5 million per acre. You know, it's built in the mid 1800s. This is the Georgia Theater at 33 million per acre. Here at the Georgian, we talked about it before, but just wanted to show off, you know, it's been around for a long time, and is producing a lot of value at 43 million per acre. It's also fun to kind of highlight different streets, kind of these streetscapes, and show how, you know, they've been producing a lot of value for a long time, with developments like Cutters up to from 16 million per acre up to the Fringe at 32 million per acre. And then here's the 110 East Clayton. And just the last one, highlighting College Ave, just some different developments along College Ave that, you know, right across from campus, generating a lot of value. And here's just one more roll up. So we talked about those kind of countywide averages on the top. And then here, just highlighting some of those individual historic buildings that we just checked out. So yeah, again, a lot of value being produced, even in old buildings. We like to do this comparison, just again, highlighting how certain areas can have kind of an outsized influence in terms of property value productivity. So this is a little strip of East Broad Street, just 0.3 acres, and comparing that to the Walmart on Atlanta Highway. These two developments have the same footprint, or sorry, same value, but a dramatically different footprint. So just showing how this compact development pattern can generate a tremendous amount of value, rivaling even something on nearly 10 acres of property like the Walmart. And just as a final roll up, we like to call this the Brady Bunch slide, putting residential, commercial, and mixed use developments at different densities, low density on the left, medium density, and higher density on the right. And just taking kind of some samples of those different development patterns and putting them all in one place. And we really like to pause here where we put those numbers on a bar chart, and we can really kind of compare them side by side, showing how as you progress through those different land use types at different densities, you see dramatic changes in that value per acre metric. And just to kind of connect some of those photos and numbers we were seeing back to that 3D model we started with, we can kind of put some of these different samples and call them out in the model, just to help connect the different pieces of the presentation that we've looked at so far, and see how those street view images, those kind of on the street graphics, tie back into the 3D model. The last thing that we wanted to show today of kind of the current work that we've done, and there's still a little refinement that we're going to do, but just looking at how different zoning categories across the county perform from this value per acre perspective. So looking at the county, 71,000 acres, about 36% of that is in some sort of agricultural designation. 29% is in a single family designation. 7% is in industrial, 6% is in commercial, 4% is in residential mixed density, and then the rest is kind of in a variety of other categories, or kind of is institutional or non-taxable. So that's kind of how it all shakes out from a land consumption perspective. When we shift to looking at that and comparing it to the value productivity perspective, this is kind of how it performs. And three that we want to kind of call out here is the single family, commercial, and residential mixed density. And one of the things a further refinement we're going to work on here, but we just wanted to show y'all today is that, single family does produce a lot of value, but it also does consume a significant amount of the land area of the county. Comparing that to commercial, which generates about half, or about a little more than half of the value that single family does, but takes up, a quarter, less than a quarter of the space that single family takes up. And then similarly for residential mixed density, again, 21% of value produced, but only 4% of the space being taken up. So that's, 5 times the productivity of footprint to value. Commercial is at about 4 times, and single family is just over 1.5. So that's where you're seeing kind of this productivity of those different uses and kind of more compact development playing a role in how much space versus how much value is being generated. That's kind of the end of the major analytical pieces we have for the work that we've done so far. I can show an example from another place where we're going to go with our work here, looking at that both the revenue generation and then the cost side of things, cost of maintaining different land use patterns from another community that we worked in, if that would be interesting. Or I can stop and we can jump back to any slides that y'all would like to look at that I've already shown. So I'll leave it up to y'all, whatever you'd prefer.
Yeah, I think talking about some costs
Yeah.
would be very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want the teams.
I would like, I want to know how you guys go about the cost determination stuff.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I'll jump into that. And so we call it a return on investment, right? A return on investment, where we're comparing the revenues and then the costs to kind of get a net perspective on different land use productivities. So this is an example from Springfield, Missouri. Some kind of revenues we kind of spread evenly across the community because they're not very spatially related. But then we look at things like charges for services, sales tax, and property tax. Those kind of have a very direct connection to land use and productivity. The little inset in this circle here is a highlight of, this is a stack of, the sales tax and property tax revenue for Springfield. And so that's kind of what we're seeing, but it's all in green, showing all of the revenues here for Springfield. And they kind of had a net, or they had an operating revenue of about 446 million. When we look at the costs, there are some things that are kind of evenly spread again, but then in those government expenses, but then we have those kind of operations and maintenance pieces that are, again, connected to land use and the different infrastructure systems that are used to support those land uses. So in Springfield, we considered roads, water, sewer, and stormwater. And so those are kind of the 4 pieces that go into the operations and maintenance of those systems, that 173 million for a total of 497 million. And this, I'll note that especially on the operations and maintenance piece, this is not necessarily what their budget says they're spending in a given year, but based on our analysis of their different infrastructure systems, how much they should be spending to maintain those infrastructure systems at a sufficient level of service in perpetuity. Because once, a piece of that infrastructure system is installed, the city's on the hook for maintaining that, forever, basically. So yeah, here it is in 3D. We'll turn it negative and then put those revenues on top. And so now we have a parcel by parcel basis for comparing the revenue generation versus the cost of servicing different areas of the city. We'll flip the model on its side. So we're looking at it, in profile. Again, kind of, you can see the cost of maintaining and servicing different areas of the city going negative and the revenues positive. And here it's netted out. And one of the things that's interesting is that this perspective makes it seem like things aren't so bad in Springfield, but you can still see the net negative number of 48 million, right? But when you kind of bring it back to that overhead perspective, you can kind of see what's going on. 80% of their city is operating at a net negative, and only 20% is net positive. And that's part of a function of how their government's funded. They make most of their revenue off of sales tax. So residential areas are bound to kind of be a drain from this kind of revenue generation perspective. But it's, it's kind of this balance of different land uses in their community. But it's interesting to just see these patterns. The commercial corridors are where you're getting a lot of the net positive developments, and then residential areas are kind of more net negative. Here's a view, what we call the worm's eye view. If you kind of look at the model from underneath, and you can see this kind of plateau of net negativity across the city. And when we bring it back, again, those kind of commercial corridors are what are most net positive for them. And this is like we showed the Brady Bunch for y'all. This is kind of an example from actually Annapolis, Maryland, but doing the same thing, taking those different residential, commercial, mixed use typologies and showing what their net position is from this revenue generation versus cost to serve perspective. And we can kind of put those on a similar bar chart like we looked at before to show what is most net negative versus net positive. And so, we'll be working to produce something similar for Athens-Clarke moving forward. This is kind of how it shakes out when we do that comparison of revenues on a parcel by parcel basis to cost to serve on a parcel by parcel basis. I think that's all I have. Yeah, that's all. So is there anything y'all would like me to jump back to?
Adam, I have a question about the charts that you just showed us. This is Matt Hall speaking. The parcel by parcel, looking at it citywide, feels a little, we can see the trends kind of, but it's a little hard to read. Like, looking at that, imagining something like that for Athens, it's a little hard to read. And I wonder, do you guys do, a way to present similar information, might be to, take a contiguous area that is zoned single family with a certain lot size, 15,000 square foot lot or 25,000 square foot lot, and just show us that. Like, just show us, for instance, the neighborhood we call Forest Heights here, where it's 25,000 acre minimum lot size and it's suburban residential, and just kind of like basically do a case study of what that low density single family detached looks like versus higher density single family detached, like with 1,000 square foot minimum lot size or something. I think that, speaking only for myself, but also I suspect it might be something that others would find easier to parse. Like, that sort of way of displaying it that you just put up there is useful, but I like the kind of geographical bar chart thing. I just wonder if you can zoom in a little rather than showing the whole city. And I know the work is underway, but it's just a thought about an output that could potentially be valuable here. It's just to do a zoom in and just say, here's a case study of a low density single family detached neighborhood with 25,000 square foot lots and what its positive or negative economic impact is, and then compare that to just one other higher density neighborhood or two, something like that. And we could make some suggestions, or I know you're in ongoing consultations with staff. I know that they could, point you to great neighborhoods to use for that kind of program. But I just found that the citywide one was a little hard to wrap my head around.
Sure. No, totally. Yeah, thank you for that feedback. Yeah, we definitely will plan to do some zoom ins like that and comparisons just to, help the information connect a little bit better. And yeah, any recommendations you have for neighborhoods, we'd be happy to consider those and try and incorporate those into the analysis. And to have those connections, or sorry, those comparisons that connect for people. So definitely.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, Matt, were you wanting, I'm guessing Forest Heights RS-25, were you wanting an RS-25 versus another RS-25, or are you wanting an RS-25 versus RS-5, RM?
Exactly.
Okay.
The latter, an RS, it could be Green Acres, it could be Forest Heights, whatever, just a pretty sizable RS-25 neighborhood with a lot of roads and sewer and water and those costs and wide street frontages compared to one of our more dense, Reese Hancock, RS5, RM1 kind of neighborhoods or something. You guys may think of a better example for the more dense one, but that's, that was the thought. Just to kind of similar to what they're showing on a citywide basis, but just a zoomed in case study, which I think will be more accessible to all of us and the county commission and others too.
They cheated and sent us a dynamic map, so we got to zoom around and look at things, and it was a lot of fun. So I totally understand. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Sarah. So in your final presentation and report, will, I guess in both the presentation and the report, will you go into more detail about how you assess the cost of these different land use types?
We talk about each infrastructure system in more detail. So, and kind of give the different components that we consider in our cost analysis. We don't necessarily go into too much detail about, how we assign all the costs. But we can provide that information definitely. And a lot of it is, we work with staff to make sure that the kind of assumptions that we're using when running these calculations are the same as assumptions that they use to maintain the infrastructure and kind of standards that they have for maintaining the infrastructure and how much it costs, to make sure that we're kind of tracking with local conditions. But we could definitely provide that information. We'll go in definitely in more detail when we kind of break down each infrastructure system, but we do keep it relatively high level, so we don't get too into the weeds.
And when you do these presentations, is there like a so what portion at the end? Like, what should we take away from this? Like at the end and at the beginning, I guess. So I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Sorry.
No, yeah. So just thinking about this in terms of the final presentation and the so what, and whether or not that so what is accepted by the people voting to accept it, and the people who show up to complain about stuff. I feel like there is a great deal of mistrust and a great deal, just like in mistrust of institutions. It's the story of the nation right now. Distrust of expertise, anti-intellectualism, whatever you want to call it, for various reasons. And I worry that if you get up and you give your presentation and you keep it too high level with the, like, here's how, here's how I got these numbers and showing your work, if it stayed at that high level, then you would end your presentation, you would walk away, and then the voting meeting would come up, and people would be like, oh, well, why should we trust these numbers? Why should we trust these guys? He didn't, and if it's written down in the fine print, people won't read it. So you got to do it in the presentation to the final decision makers. That is my feeling, is that showing your work might be more necessary than you would hope.
No, we can appreciate that. We definitely want to make sure as we're going through the process and when that leading up to the final presentation, that we have meetings with staff, and we do try and find times to have opportunities, or try and find times to meet with some of those decision makers and kind of dig into it a little bit more then too. But yeah, I can definitely appreciate that perspective of wanting to make sure that everything's really clear about how the results were generated. So yeah, no, that's definitely something we'll take into account.
Sarah, to your point,
Thank you.
one of the reasons why we were so eager to engage with Urban 3 is because they do use local data. So they really take the information provided by their client community and then go through these steps. They're not taking some proprietary data that they've plucked from some third source. They're not cooking census numbers into some direction to, they're using it's farm to table, right? It's homegrown data that they're feeding us. And that's what makes this so compelling. But I think your point's well taken. That messaging needs to be loud and clear so that the assumption, and it probably needs to be said beginning, during, and after, that is your approach, Adam, is you aren't serving up some pre-cooked something that a lot of consultants kind of have as their bread and butter, where they roll in, they've got their thing, they've pulled from this data source that they also happen to be a partner with, and they spit out a report. This is our stuff. So if there's a question to be raised about the end result, the question, and if the procedure is clearly understood, we want the question to focus on the data that is in our community.
Yeah.
And not on the permutations that have been done with it. But where did these numbers come from? Oh, I understand now. Why is that so big? Or why is that so small? Or why is it right there and not over here? That's where we want the conversation to go.
That makes sense.
100%.
Thanks, Adam, for everything y'all are doing. I was telling Matt earlier, I love graphs. I can see things, I can feel it better. And I like what Sarah had said. I totally agree. I like to know exactly some of those costs. And I think a lot of our citizens would too, because a lot of them are smart. They know what they need to hear. And so that would be good. Question I've got, you're showing us value and cost of certain areas and residential versus mixed use versus commercial. Are y'all going to eventually show what could be, or could we request, like if you took a single family neighborhood and started going with, if we did accessory dwellings in it, if we did took a step further and added duplexes, mix that into an existing single family neighborhood. That, we're seeing what we got. Okay, now what could we have? Is that something y'all are doing, will do, could do? Bad idea?
Yeah, a component of our work is projections. And so, yeah, once we have the full revenue picture with the property tax and sales tax, and then kind of the full cost picture with all those infrastructure systems, and then, yeah, comparing those kind of averages across different general land use patterns, we can definitely then kind of move forward and look at areas of interest. And yeah, whether it be doing what you described, we've done that in a place before, looking at single family parcels and the potential for adding ADUs or increasing density. And yeah, we'll be working with staff to kind of figure out what are the best projections and any recommendations y'all have of like what sort of projections would be most interesting to dig into. But that's definitely kind of the third phase of our work. So the revenue and the cost, and then more forward looking based off of those the revenue and cost components.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So yeah, if you want to put any bugs in Mark and Bruce's ear about anything you want to see in projections.
I see that Jen Fleece has her hand raised.
Hi, yeah. I just have a question. Do you, when you were talking about Springfield, Missouri's case study, it sounds like that is not a completed project. But when you see that $46 million deficit, do you have any examples of what types of recommendations you leave the city to help rectify that kind of deficit? You know, what are some of the things that you could expect to come out of this report? What types of things would you recommend?
Um, we definitely have ideas, but one of the things that we as a firm like to try and do are kind of present numbers and let communities come to their own conclusions about what, based off of those numbers, based off of kind of those facts that we present, what makes the most sense for them to move forward to kind of make a community's financial long-term picture look better. I mean, in Springfield, it's a little tough because, you know, how heavily dependent they are on sales tax revenue uh, to help fund their local government. It's kind of clear that if they added more commercial, then that would be better for them from a fiscal perspective. But you also need to balance that out with having residential areas that people want to live in to then go shop at those commercial areas. And creating a city that people want to live in. So there's a balance there. But I'd say at the end, you know, we can have we'll have ideas based off of what the data tells us for Athens of paths forward, but we try not to be prescriptive or be too overt in making any sort of recommendations in particular.
Can I say something that you showed us and say something I've seen your firm work on before that might get to where Jen's question is going? I think if
Yep.
you saw, obviously the Brady Bunch chart was a perfect example. There's a space to an open space to and I don't mean open space in the sense of parks and trees and everything like that. A use of the space, a lot of those had large surface parking lots, Walmart being the key they kicked it off with, compared to some of the other ones that are built up onto those parcels. So I think that's one very straightforward answer that comes out of their work. But one of the other things I've seen Urban 3 project is some of those cost revenues. And I think Adam he mentioned it, but I don't know, he stayed on this too long, is a lot of those costs are projecting the costs to maintain that infrastructure out through many years. And I've seen them do some graphs where it builds and then they show those same things and they show what you might do with expansion and how that builds on that. And then how every so often, 50 years for roads, 100 years for bridges, those expenses continue to build on each other. And so if the municipality does not keep up with that building, it gets into this concept that, this development Ponzi scheme that we're trying to spread ourselves out to pick up new developments to pay for the costs of all the things that we've had to pay for years. And so I'm going to take a guess that Urban 3 is going to have a graph like that. And they've done it before where they've tied it very explicitly to Athens-Clarke County has 687 miles of roads and 4,000 miles of pipes and 20 million miles of wire and all those things. That might help also shade the picture in a little bit more and kind of show where some of the spending and where some of the productivity sort of begin to come together, I think. If that's fair, Adam, if I'm representing that correctly.
I'd say so. I was going to see if I could pull up an example. Let me try and pull up the Annapolis example because there's, I think an interesting, that chart you're just talking about, Mark, that would be interesting to show. But you'll just have to give me a second. But I don't know if there's any other questions.
We have a couple of members of the public here who are well informed on these matters. Do you guys have any questions or comments or?
Sounds good.
If so,
Go up there. All right. I had one similar to what Mark was saying. There's a point that I kind of accept as, I think I've heard you guys say it, but the question of, we know that downtown is the most productive area of town, but I think we have areas like our green belt, which are not productive, but they also don't demand a lot of costs and services. And so I wondered if you were going to present something on the value of preserving those, rather than just, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think we're in a kind of we have a unique opportunity working with y'all to kind of really see that full perspective. Most of the places that we've done this combination of revenue and cost analysis are in cities that are largely developed. Um, varying scales of development, but it'll be really interesting to see kind of those agricultural areas on the uh, outskirts of the county and how they perform. We suspect that, they, like you mentioned, they might not be that productive from this property value tax generation perspective. But we also suspect that, they won't, uh, crops don't call the police, cows don't have to go to school, and so those areas don't consume services in the same way that developed areas of the county do. And so it'll be really interesting to see that what that picture looks like in Athens-Clarke. I think, we suspect that it might not be net negative, or it might not be net positive, or just slightly net positive from this kind of total perspective. But if it is negative, it would probably be slightly, only slightly, compared to other kind of lower density developed areas that do have those kind of water, sewer, road services. And so that'll be interesting to dig into. Does that answer your question okay?
Yeah, that's great. I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
You
No, I
just
was just-
mentioned,
Go ahead, sorry.
you just mentioned calling the police, and so I wanted to double check, because I didn't think that public safety was on your list of costs. Is it on the list, or is
It's
it?
No, it's not. That one is a bit more complex compared to infrastructure systems to the kind of map, um, and so that will get spread across the county. But we do try and make that spreading of costs of kind of those more like general services, police, fire, um, parks and recreation. We try and make that a little bit more dependent on population, or kind of some other metrics that we can use. So it's not just like this even bar spread across, or kind of even spread of peanut butter across the county, but kind of make it a little bit more spatially intelligent. But we don't get as detailed with considering kind of the spatiality of some of those more general type costs in our analysis. And I did find that chart that Mark was talking about, if y'all want to look at it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's up to y'all.
Please.
Now you got it.
Okay. Share the screen. Okay. So this is from Annapolis. And what Mark was talking about is, so what we'll do is look at roads and when their kind of initial birth date. Let me move this. Their kind of initial birth date, and then kind of this the build and then rebuild cycle. So here's the kind of the decades that all the roads were built in Annapolis. And so looking at this road from 1910, or the roads in the 1910s, they had to be rebuilt in the 70s. So Annapolis, we worked with them to kind of adjust our assumptions around build or around rebuild and kind of reconstruction. They kind of use a longer timeline. Typically, we estimate like a 50-year from when a road is built to when it's going to need to be totally reconstructed. They were kind of more on like a 60-year time frame. And sorry, these are actually every 20 years. So the 10s to 30s. So little bit wider windows here, but you can see that then that's when these roads are going to have to be rebuilt moving forward, and then again rebuilt again. And so that's kind of this cascading effect that Mark was talking about. And, we don't know where it's going to go, how many more roads are going to be built moving forward from in the 2020s and 2030s, but that's just going to get added on top as we just keep moving forward in time. And so we kind of like to joke that, a road is forever. Diamond's forever, so is a road, and that it's going to need to be maintained in perpetuity moving forward. So, yeah, that was kind of that chart that Mark was talking about. That we'll have one for Athens.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Adam. Are there any other questions, Portland?
A little thing. Is it too strong to say that we shouldn't build more roads in that case? Because they last forever. I don't need to answer that right now, but if you do want, that's fine.
I mean, I think it's just about being smart about where you're building them, and if it's worth that investment. If you're gonna, generate the revenue to support it from whatever it's being built for. So, and to be fair, if there's a decision to build a road to access, a non-taxable amenity that's really valuable for the community, then that might be a decision that's justifiable. But as long as there's kind of as long as the community is entering those decisions with eyes wide open and having kind of these numbers to understand what you're getting into, then I think it's up to your community's values, and that's where we like to kind of stay agnostic. We think of ourselves as accountants. We don't care if you buy a boat, if you buy a house, buy a car, as long as you know that you have the money to do it or not.
Great. Yeah. One thing slightly more specifically, are you looking at different typologies of roads? For example, we require certain road widths for different kinds of developments, and that's something that's under discussion right now. I think a lot of us would like less pavement.
Yeah, we definitely will see that play out in kind of our cost analysis. The more pavement there is, the more costly, and we can often tie those to different development patterns. So we might not have kind of those specifics related to what the requirements are for building new roads, but we'll kind of see how that ties in with the land use patterns around those pieces of infrastructure, and if the trends on those land use patterns are kind of net positive and paying for those infrastructure investments.
Okay, just I wonder if you get as specific as saying, how much pavement per development type or.
Yeah, I mean, I think we will probably be able to. We do like to look at kind of the totals across the community. How much? Let me actually see if I have one. I have an example from Athens or from Annapolis. Yeah, let me jump in. I'll show you real quick. This is a map that we always like to make as long as the data is available.
Katie's a plant from our transportation and public works departments.
And to the point you just said, I don't want that to go lost. The data that's available. So the data that Transportation and Public Works is sharing right now will be the data that you're working with to run these numbers. That'll be the same data to identify trends. And as we move beyond the life of this particular project and start to maintain this data locally on our own, the output's only as good as the input. And so we're going to have to, if we want to know those answers to those questions, we're going to have to track that data.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Definitely true. Oh, yeah, no, and this is a much broader scale compared to what you're kind of talking about and being interested in, looking at kind of the specifics for different development patterns. But we could totally, you could zoom in and look at specific examples and how it plays out from what I'm about to get into. So this is just comparing essentially different land cover. In black are building footprints, red is parking, gray is all the road network, and then tan is other land. And so then we'll kind of similarly how we looked at the zoning, we'll do a similar comparison looking at kind of how much value these different land covers generate. And of course roads cost rather than being kind of a value generator themselves. But you can kind of see how productive the buildings are, of course, compared to like parking and other land. But just kind of getting that overall perspective on, how much building, parking, and roads there are. And it is, I don't know if we did a zoom in for Annapolis. Oh yeah, this is kind of just breaking it down by their population, average square feet of these different components per person, and then kind of what the value is per square foot for these different, for these different pieces. So we can run similar analyses in Athens too. So yeah.
I think one of the things Katie's getting at is that a lot of people, especially in the transportation world and in the urban planning world, feel that we've overbuilt roads for many years. And I know you guys just sort of go on a square foot metric, but I think what Katie's asking is, does a certain development form, and correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, does a certain development form need X, Y, or Z, the standard 24 feet, curb to curb, or can it handle that? And is there a cost savings? And is there kind of a connection or a nexus between those two? Is that where you're going towards a little bit?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to do some similarly to how we were talking about zooming into certain neighborhoods or certain areas of the city and looking at that revenue and cost perspective. We can do it just looking at kind of that infrastructure investment perspective from kind of surface cover, and then value generation there. Kind of doing like we'll often do it with places that have a sentiment that there isn't enough parking in their downtown. I know we've done that analysis in a few cities, one of them being Indianapolis, and they just were way over parked in their downtown. They had so much surface parking and structured parking, but there was this perception that, they didn't have enough parking downtown, but I think it was like 30 or 40% of their downtown was parking. That can be an interesting comparison, and we could do something similar, looking at kind of with more of a focus on roads in different neighborhoods and how they perform compared to each other.
Yeah, and I know one of Katie's bosses spoke to me a little bit about vehicle miles traveled like per roadway, and so factoring in the amount of use of that roadway. I mean, there is a comparison of how productive a road is in terms of what it actually yields, knowing that they have a very similar life structure and cost, and a low intensity use road really isn't as productive as a similarly scaled road that has thousands, tens of thousands of vehicle miles per day. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. I was talking to him about your guys' analysis, and that was the first thing that popped into his mind as a traffic engineer, transportation planner. And so I thought that was kind of interesting to talk about the actual productivity of the use of the road. So I don't know, I've never seen you guys get into that, but I thought it was another interesting way to slice it up to kind of show the value. And it also shows where you're putting the people in front of all the other businesses that go into why some of these businesses are so valuable that you're showing from a value per acre basis there. So just a thought from our assistant transportation director. So.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions from them? Last call. All right. Thank you very much, Adam. We appreciate it.
Thanks. Great to meet you all. And yeah, we're looking forward to continuing through the analysis.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good evening.
You too.
Y'all think?
Yeah, it seems really good. The question that I asked him, I've been thinking about it a little bit more, and I think basically what when he did his Brady Bunch diagram, he's got like the low density residential with a number of like it's negative 17,000 or whatever he had on his chart. It seems to me that if it's possible to get more granular in the single family category, because like 90% of our residential zoned land is zoned RS something. but like you could compare Forest Heights to Nottingham, RS-25 to RS-8, directly across the street from each other, very similar topography and everything, and just like, I think that would be a really valuable sort of comparison to make here, right? So that rather than lumping all of our RS-5 to RS-25 all together in the single family detached low density residential, I think, for the county commissioners that are ultimately going to make decisions based on this, if they can see that like the fairly high density single family detached, like I'm thinking of Peter Poplar, area where it's all RS-5, it's a pretty large contiguous area of RS-5, and comparing that to RS-15, 5 points or something. I mean, 5 points has much higher values, and so maybe the numbers will show something different than what I might suspect, or maybe they won't, right? But I just think it'd be very interesting to see what does an area like Green Acres generate in terms of costs and property tax revenue versus an RS-8 or an RS-5 area.
I think certainly as you control for location and start to measure the impact of other variables like lot size or like lot coverage, or there's a number of other things that you could tease out of this. That's the power of this analysis is to kind of dial in on a question like that, and then just see, so what's the performance really? And I know you're using zoning as a shorthand. You're really talking about a half-acre lot versus a 5,000 square foot lot.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not necessarily the zoning that's on it, but
You're right.
to your point, to look at development form and say, you've got two types of development forms on either side of the same corridor where service delivery should be relatively controlled for. Should be relatively the similar water, similar sewer, similar. Now, what are we talking about when you compare the dissimilar types, the forms of development? I think the other interesting thing, there's all kinds of wish lists we have growing on the back hall as we look at this every single time. Proximity to other uses, or the singularity of development versus a mixed character of development. What does that do to productivity from a performance standpoint on the revenue side, but also on the cost side? And so the more we kind of taffy pull at this data, the cooler stories that start to come out of it. And again, the data geek in me that wants to use primary source data is to be able to go to places to take elected officials or you guys or citizens or investors and say, in Athens, here's what we know about this block. Not, I read an article about a block in Kansas City. Like this right here that you can touch and you can see how it's being used. This is doing this. Now, hop in the van and let's go take a look at this other spot that's a quarter mile away. And I can tell you a different story about the performance of this development characteristic. That's just so strong to be able
Yeah, I mean, I think Forest Heights, Nottingham was a particularly good, it holds everything else constant, like you said, and maybe.
except for age. So Nottingham being considerably
Doesn't
older than
affect sewer usage.
it doesn't, unless we get into that cascading notion of the infrastructure and the cost of maintenance. So Nottingham being 20 to 30 years older than Forest Heights, so you got to take that into account. It's not a reason not to do it, but it's a reason to start to understand aging infrastructure versus like super aging infrastructure versus aging infrastructure. I mean, but I think that's a reason to talk about it.
I think the other really interesting thing about the age from when I did get to poke around is looking at what was on the ground in terms of especially zoning. So if you look at some of the stuff that's been developed recently, where we have required open space, we have things that are a little bit more compact. So everyone know Lake Mueller out past the mall off of Cleveland Road, or Towns Walk out off of Timothy. So those two subdivisions built under our current code where we're requiring more. And I would really like to see their analysis of those two because we have full sidewalks throughout them, which we don't have in Forest Heights and we don't have in Nottingham. But built under our current code compared to codes of the past, those ones started to pop off the charts. Those popped off the charts more than 5 points. And so you're talking about size, those are RS8, RS15, I guess. But they have preserved open space, so another benefit. So it's compacting the development because they're still maxing out the development on them. So and it shows that that productivity is very different on that size lot. And I didn't even look at that compared to, Green Acres or the RS25 stuff on the east side of town, which, gets really into the light greens on their maps out there.
Yeah, that would be hugely negative.
And so it's really, it talks, to me, it brought up a few different points. It brought up that we made some zoning changes in 2000 that led to, a development pattern that is more productive for the community. It talks about different ways that development pattern is good. And it also gives us a guide to going forward. And I think that goes to Jen's question is some of the answers these are guides for what is working for us to be going forward off of. And Adam's point was, we're kind of agnostic on it. We're letting you guys, we're putting everything in front of you. You guys look at your community and say, okay, there. And I think to Bruce's, primary source data, having all of that about things we actually know about here in Athens-Clarke County is all the different pictures coming together in my mind. So I think that's a very interesting comparison. And it would be neat to just see, Nottingham versus Forsyth's across the street from each other. Not too dissimilar, but yeah, definitely size is very.
And you're right. You're both right. It's not about like, if you do over 2 acres, you can do RS8, but do whatever lot size you want, right? You can condense it. It's just how many units per acre. And so, more recent developments like you're talking about where regardless of the zoning, the lot sizes are fairly compact. I think that's a really useful comparison too.
Yeah. And I mean, to Alex's business, you can look on Realtor. I mean, there's not as much for sale. I mean, those things are, I looked through Towns Walk for some reason the other day. I have no idea why, but I mean, not as many listings in Towns Walk. Obviously a pattern that people are accepting, people are liking. There's high value out there, high value to the community.
How old is it?
Towns Walk, I'm just getting finished out right now, but started 15 years ago.
Okay.
I mean, there's 2 vacant lots left, but mostly got finished out in the last few years.
Current code, for sure. Yeah.
Can I say that I'm listing a house in that very neighborhood tomorrow? or it's hitting the market tomorrow, so just throwing that out. But I do want to say, if I may, watching this for the second time and then listening to the conversation, when I started coaching as a lay coach in high school, film hit, even for soccer. So we started filming, and the head coach of the program said, one thing you're going to learn about film, to sort of hit on what you had said a little bit, you don't know if it's going to go this way or that way. You didn't do as good or as poorly as you think you did. So you're coaching the game, you see it come off and you think this, and you go look at the film and you go, a little different than I thought. I thought this was going to be what went on and whatnot. The other thing is, which kind of goes with Urban 3 that I think is important in all of this, is you can also film, send it to an analytical company that'll do all the charts and pick things out, like how many times did we touch the ball? Did a player touch the ball 3 times? How many times did we shoot from where? How many times? Amazing information that a coach like me, because I love all that. And it does the charts and does this and spot. And you just see all this. But it doesn't tell you what to do with it, which is okay, because it doesn't know the player that kicked there. But I know the player that passed there. I know this, and that's where sort of y'all come in. We come in, I think, but definitely because I'm sitting there thinking too on the roads. All right, we have a lot of terrain. I forgot who brought up terrain. You may have, but we're not flat and we're not straight in Athens very often, like say a more coastal town might be, where the roads are primarily possibly straight. So I'm guessing roads that go up and down and left and right wear faster than roads that are flat and straight. I don't know. But they don't maybe know that, but y'all know that, if that makes sense. So when the information comes in, it's also got to be fine-tuned a little bit where I think the taffy thing, we pull this, we do that. But so is that what's going to happen as well? Once we get the final product, it's, you can sort of
Yes and no.
play with that a little bit?
Yes and no. So I mean, there is a, we could analyze this and keep going, spend more money and have more analysis and get cooler ideas and we'd spend all of our time, analyzing stuff without necessarily an action to come from it. So where am I going with that? I think there's a point of return on this particular exercise where we need to keep it at a level that we can sustain it. So one of our priorities is to not have this be a one-off exercise. So with an eye towards sustaining this and using this data and this analysis across multiple departments of this government, and frankly, agencies in this community, like this is public data. So, but selfishly for our government, for our public works folks to make decisions that align with public utilities decisions, that align with land use decisions that we work on together, and have those all draw from the same pool of data, that's a first. Like we fight for that all the time. We try to do that with population stuff. Well, this is jumping light years ahead of just having population numbers. So could we dig in and have really deep kind of meaningful analysis on paved widths and depths and curb heights and curb designs? And that's just picking on TPW things. But I mean, you can do this across a bunch of, I don't know that we're going to get to that level unless a department wants to pick up the ball and gets excited about it and dig into that level. This exercise, we're going to keep kind of at a point where we know we're not going to choke ourselves out from having to maintain so many data points that we can't keep it current. We've got to keep that data collection and plugging in reasonable so that we can actually do it. But by all means, if a department wants to hit liftoff, take that as a stepping off point and then plug in more of their data and do a deeper push into some things that are qualitative and quantitative, that's awesome. Because that's yet another value added out of this investment that we've made in this moment.
That's the going forward. We have sat down with Urban 3 over 2 hours, I think, with TPW, and they said, we got all the generic numbers. And they're like, nope, we're 12 cents more per square foot on that. We're $100 more per linear foot of guardrail on that. I mean, they've gone into that level for the cost side. When he said, we'll give you all the numbers, we can get you all the spreadsheets if you guys want, but they're digging into that level. To Bruce's point, to continue going forward, upkeep of that's going to probably get a little bit more generalized, but we've sat down with TPW specifically. They're sitting down with PUD specifically to do that. And they're saying 13 cents. No, that's 17 cents per blank or whatever. So that level of difference between the flat coastal road and the hilly roads around here, is really being dug into by our staff members. So.
I can kind of back you up for a second, and I apologize for being late, but the context for this is specifically related to the future land use map work, or is it more the beginning of sort of a longer term relationship with Urban 3 to do some of these analyses? Like what
we used the future land use exercise to be able to partner with them. We didn't need the future land use to find value in this exercise, but it was a way that as we were bringing that project forward and we had the commission's attention, they were on board, that the county commission was on board with saying, you know what, we like this economic analysis of things. We wish we had that. Oh, by the way, as long as you're doing land use policy, let's do that. And let's go ahead and craft our next future land use map with an eye towards the financials. We've never done that before. We've kind of guessed at it. There are certain things you kind of get a sense you think you're getting right. But what we've recognized and what we've seen in their work in particular is that those guesses towards getting something right, in worst cases, can bankrupt a community. So why do that? So we've got a track record, we've got a built environment that we can measure and analyze, so let's do it. Going forward, we may be one of the first communities working with Urban 3 where they're handing off cookbook, or at least a version of the cookbook. Probably not going to have the whole thing because they got to, it's their cookbook. But they're leaving us with something so that we can continue to use this tool and not have to contract with them. Might we have another opportunity to work with them in a consultant kind of relationship? Sure. And I think our relationship, this project has gone very well, and I wouldn't see a reason not to, but we didn't want to have to do that. So they're teaching us to fish, and we're going to use this approach in a simpler, more manageable style to inform across all of the decisions that we're making that have a reason to touch on those economic data points and how it connects to development. So the tax assessor's office is going to value this. You know, all of our engineering offices, potentially leisure services could do that. Solid waste. It goes on and on and on. And then you look at our community partners that could also look at this too, the hospital authorities or the university if they choose to, or the school district, or you start to, like I say, you start pulling at it. You're like, wow, that'd be really cool. And then you throw in another variable that maybe they don't do, but maybe this other agency knows the data points on that, and then they can kind of do their own thing. But we're all starting from the same point with the data that we're going to maintain collectively.
We've got some GIS folks who are really excited about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So the story mapping that can come from this, and that performance. So this is a moment in time. They're going to run some scenarios for us, like you mentioned, the mall. Some of those district level or corridor level analyses were baked into our contract. And so as we get through this, we'll identify some of those to help inform some discussions and show what this could do. But moving forward, we want to be able to use this to say, all right, in 2024, we had this. In 2025, we had this. I don't know what the frequency is going to be. It'd be great if it was annual. It may be every 2 years based on the work effort. We just don't know yet. But to be able to track over time those same charts and almost animate it, that's cool. So, and it's useful. Like, it's not just cool, it's actually something that an elected official or staff or the community can understand and kind of start to make informed decisions that already was.
It's interesting, like Katie brought this up too, just thinking about parks and open space, or I don't remember actually how that was brought up exactly, but sort of interesting. And maybe he addressed how they, I mean, they're thinking about funding county government, right? They're thinking about a budget and what needs to come in to some extent. But it doesn't really capture the sort of ecosystem services that open space brings from the standpoint of not just like air, but also sort of stormwater management, right? Like it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that, but it's kind of interesting to think about if there would ever be a way to quantify that, which might actually be more related to property values or something. I'm not really sure, but it's just kind of interesting that it's very sort of satisfyingly economic way to look at it. But there's always going to be some things that get missed when you only look at economics.
Well, and so here, yes, I agree with all that. And I think some of what you're asking for would make a killer dissertation, just awesome. We have functioned as a government, much like all of our peer governments, without really doing this kind of analysis. This is meant to round out the portfolio. It's meant to round out, not replace, but round out the community discussion about things of community value. There are things as a community that will appear as sinks in this analysis that we as a community largely love and adore and will never get rid of. And so that's not to call those things out as bad. It's to call them out, recognize them, and realize those are special. That's
It's like
not.
we see your data, and we've, as a community, have decided
This is
we
okay.
accept that loss, or we
To subsidize whatever that thing is
Yeah.
that appeared in this analysis as a sink.
Yeah.
That's okay, but that's a far more informed discussion to have.
Right, having that be data driven rather than
Yes.
sort of like, because people may not realize that downtown is subsidizing forest heights. That everyone's taxes are subsidizing an unsustainable or money losing neighborhood from the city's perspective. But like Sandy Creek Nature Center, we're all happy to pay something for because we get use out of it and it's valuable to the community, and that's a decision that we all made, you know. But and having data about that isn't going to change that decision, right? We all think that Sandy Creek's great and we want it, but we might not all be willing to pay the same amount of money to subsidize Forest Heights or Green Acres or other RS20.
Jen's got a question, but there's another thing to this, like industrial's a sink, but industrial provides jobs and industrial does a few other things that we value. So that's some of that local knowledge. We have to take their analysis and use some of our local knowledge to not only have the nice things that we want and look at some of the ecosystem services, which our community forester actually does, has some of that information. But also the things that provide some of the other stuff. I mean, job creation is a huge thing that our economic development department does, but that land is very sprawling and large and not as valuable. So there's a lot of other things we have to realize that have value in different ways. And that's the red and the green map that he showed of Springfield. We just need to make sure there's enough of that green to spread out the red. And so we need to figure that out. So that's some of the other important stuff that I think they leave to the locals to work on.
Yeah. Of course. Well, thank you guys. It's really great. Oh, hi, Jen. Is your hand up on purpose?
No, I was really just going to echo what Mark and Matt just said. I mean, the takeaway of this for me is if you look at it from the economic lens, it gives you a point to choose. How do we want to offset some of the things that are of value but are not economic drivers? How can we better balance our land use so that we can afford some of these things that don't drive our revenue, but we need and want to have? So yeah, I think that this is a really interesting approach, and I think it will help when we see everything to understand what eggs we want to put in which baskets.
And the key is understanding it's not going to be everything from a cost standpoint.
Right.
So as long as and to this is to Sarah's point, as long as we make it clear beginning, during, and end about what the study's doing, where its boundaries are, how far did it go? I think that'll keep us in the proper headspace for using it the right way and not sort of picking at it unnecessarily. I think open space and the secondary benefit of open space. I'm interested to see when we get a little more granular what proximity does from a property tax standpoint and the revenue that comes from somebody who's close to a park as opposed to far from a park. And how does that change the dynamic for a single family or a multifamily? We'll be able to see that, right? It's not, so that we can make decisions about what parks do and don't contribute to us financially. But we're not going to get to that tertiary level of spin-off economic benefits. It's just beyond the scope. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys. This is awesome. Glad you're doing this.
We just want you to be excited as we are. That's all. That's
It makes me feel good every time we talk to them. I go home like, I enjoyed my job.
Exactly right.
I've seen them present at several things. I was just like, when are we going to do that here? That's awesome. It is really a cool way to think about things, and yeah, it's great. It's been great.
And Adam's great, but Joe is a wizard of his own. So I think when we get to the end, you guys, it'll be even more powerful because he's an incredible storyteller. And that's what I really think. They're accountant storytellers to me. They paint that picture really well and they tell that story and they make people understand the car example, just like, oh yeah, that's obvious, right? But I never thought about it.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your attention and coming out, asking questions and poking at it. And we'll have updates in the months ahead as we wrap up this step. But we're real excited to get this to the community and to the elected officials and see their reaction to it, because we think it's kind of eye-opening. For sure.
For sure. Yeah, and it might be nice to, when they make their final presentation to the elected officials, like if it's possible just to, host that on county website in perpetuity, like, or, you know, just so that people who, so that like when we're having conversations with people, we can say like, you need to watch this,
Check that thing.
you know, like you,
Or new planning commissioners are on board, say.
yeah, right,
Watch that video on
right.
YouTube.
And new county commissioners.
But we also want, I mean, we want them to present to the elected officials, but we want them to present to the public as well. We
Yeah.
want that to be a big thing. We're working on that already to make that a big thing.
A large event. This isn't going to be something in here. It's going to be a large event and
It might be on ice even.
Ha
Might be what?
ha.
not kidding.
Is it possible to get a copy of this presentation?
Yeah, we can get it to you.
And the link for the meeting, I mean, this is being recorded, so
Oh, that's right. It's in the link.
yeah,
Yep.
that may be even more helpful where you can hear the conversation.
True.
All right.
Awesome. That's it. This meeting is adjourned.
There was no
Never
meeting.
happened.
Going back to bed.